It is a great honour for me to speak here today on Blue Knot Day. I'd like to firstly thank the Foundation and again Dr. Kathy Kesselman for your leadership, your friendship and your incredible work that you guys have done over several decades now. Today's about Blue Knot Day. It's really about raising awareness around the trauma of those who experience trauma as children. So I thought today I'll speak briefly about not my personal story of the abuse, I think many people here are aware, but I will touch on it briefly, but about the impact. I was sexually abused by two different people within an institution. It really doesn't matter if it was within an institution, it happens to be a Jewish one, an ultra-Orthodox one, but as we've come to see through the Royal Commission, it really doesn't matter, it could have happened anywhere, most likely within the home. Went to the police, went to the leadership, I had the doors shut in my face, 96. A few years, 6 years or so after the abuse. That stayed with me the whole time. Throughout the late 80s when the abuse happened, until this very day, it stays with me. As many of you would be aware, I did gain at least some semblance of justice. My second perpetrator, David Cyprus, is currently sitting in jail, and after I went public with my story, many other victims of his went to the police as well, so that made the job easier. My first perpetrator is still in New York, hopefully one day, but the institution responsible, I got finally a personal apology from them only a couple of weeks ago when I was in Melbourne. Very important in terms of the healing process and the like, especially when it's genuine. Up until basically my memoir came out, which is available down the back, there's a bookseller over there, I always used to talk about the impact of the abuse in broad terms. I used to say it's challenging, significant impact. But what does that actually mean? And it's been very difficult to express it, to say it. In many ways, just as it was difficult, understatement, to talk about the sexual abuse itself. But I've done that so many times that I don't have an issue with it now. I mean, it still triggers all sorts of things when I go home afterwards. It's difficult, but it's much easier for me. But to talk about the actual impact of the abuse, when you talk about the details, so I'll get straight into it. What is it? People look at me often and they say, you're articulate, you look healthy, you're in a relationship, there's a family, a success story. It might be a surprise to many of you, and I do write some of this in the book, pretty much all of it. In the last 2 years, and this is consistent with some of the things we've heard before, it could come at any stage. It's a long process. But in the last 2 or so years in particular, I wake up almost every morning with not just anxiety, but difficulty breathing sometimes. I lie in bed, struggling to get out of bed. I know I've got so much going on, but I'm lying down with a sense of paralysis. I know I need to do things. I've got a family, I've got kids, I've got work, I've got all these things, but my heart is racing, there's depression, and then at some point the suicide ideation comes along. And you just think, again, not every day, but in the last few months, practically every day. I want to just be dead. Or I want to go at the end of this day and just find a way to do it and end it. Or if I'm driving down the street and I'm feeling particularly anxious and upset and depressed and whatever else, you know, if there's going to be a car accident, just make it quick and let me get over it. That kind of destructive thinking. And it's difficult. It plays on your mind a great deal, obviously. when you have to park on the side of the road because you get all emotional and you've got tears streaming down your eyes for whatever reason you've just dealt with. And of course, each case is separate. Each case is different. Everyone's experience is different. And you don't have to have experienced the worst of the abuse in order to have that kind of impact. I've met plenty of people who were abused on the lower end of the scale. So let's say if we're talking sexually, not raped, but molested. But the impact on them is greater than people I've met who have been raped, at least seemingly. So I feel that it's incumbent upon me to actually talk about these things. And what I started saying before, that I'm finding it extremely difficult to discuss this mental health issue, as we refer to it here in Australia. Talking about child sexual abuse has become a lot more acceptable. I think the Royal Commission had a great deal to do with that. The fact that it's just in the news all the time, so we are talking about it. But if you start talking to people about depression, anxiety, suicide, and those types of things, they don't know what to do with themselves. I get that feeling. It used to be when I used to talk about that I was sexually abused, they didn't know what to do. Now it's, okay, what do I do? What do I say? And I understand that. It's not an easy one. And of course, when you come from different kind of communities where it's not necessarily so accepted to go to therapy or take medication, which is how in the environment I grew up in the ultra-Orthodox world. If you go to a therapist, that means you're weak. It means you're crazy if you're on medication. So I'd never really gone to therapy up until early this year. And I now go 4 times a week psychotherapy. And how you're able to work around that. Just mentally you get up, you're thinking about, I'm going to go to my therapist now, and then you talk to them for an hour or so, and it's puts you in all sorts of difficult situations, you're opening up and talking about difficult things, and the rest of the day is almost a write-off. So, as I said, I feel that it's part of my role, not only to talk about the sexual abuse, but it's also to talk about the impact. Because to change the culture, we need to talk about it. We need to make child sexual abuse, people feel comfortable talk about it. Talk about suicide. If someone wants to talk about these things, they need to feel comfortable talking about it. And one word that has still stuck with me, what Kathy said before, isolation. I'm very blessed with the fact that I have a lot of family, a lot of friends. I'm one of 17 children, but not even that, the extended family, and many friends. But I still feel extremely isolated on most days. Even if I'll be at a party with close friends, people are sometimes chatting around them and all of that, and often I end up really getting involved in the party. I enjoy partying. But I'll sit there sometimes and I just feel so lonely and so isolated. And those are the types of things that the community needs to be aware of, especially when we're talking about the statistic. 1 in 4 adults experience some form of trauma in their childhood. 5 million Australians. This is something that we need really to talk about and to make sure that the culture does change. And I think while support is critical, and obviously the Blue Knot Foundation is a leader in this area, and they should continue and hopefully go from strength to strength as many of the other support organisations, but we also need to focus on the prevention so that we don't have as many traumatised adults as we have today. On that note, thank you.